Hello, welcome to session 20, lesson 20 in the book of Judges. It's the next to the last one, and it will be the last midweek one. I believe we're going to switch to just Sunday instead of Wednesday and Sunday. And so this, since we've been doing it until I finish Judges, and this coming Sunday will be the last session, the last lesson in the book of Judges. And so I'll give you the heads up. When I'm doing these last few chapters, I feel like it was like one of those old Saturday morning serials where kids would go to the movies. This is before my time. I'm old, but not that old. They would go to the movie theaters and they'd watch, Buck Rogers, and it would, leave you in a cliffhanger. And then the next week you'd come back to watch the next episode of, Buck Rogers or Flash Gordon or Superman or whatever, Lone Ranger. Excuse me. And so it's like each time with Dear Samson, it's like the first chapter we meet his parents and how he's going to be this promising judge that God has planned especially for him. And then we get through the whole debacle of his marriage and him ultimately killing 30 Philistines and leaving his wife behind as he goes to his parents' home again, and his wife being given away to one of the other guys. And that's the cliffhanger of last time. And then we have this chapter, and then it sounds like it's all done, but then it continues on in 16th chapter. So it's kind of funny. It's kind of weird. But I invite you to join me in the book of Judges. I am reading from the New International Version. Don't ask me which year, because I'm not going to look it up. I mean, there's been different changes throughout the years in the NIV. But I will be reading from the NIV, chapter 15 of the book of Judges. And we know that the Israelites had basically become comfortable or assimilated to the fact that the Philistines were lording it over them. And they didn't ask God for help. And God came to help them anyway. But to do that, he needed to put a wedge between the complacency of the Jews and the authority of the Philistines. And he's using Samson to do that. Last chapter, he killed 30 Philistines and gave their clothes to 30 other Philistines. This is it's like, okay. So let's go. 15 verses 1 through 5. Later on, at the time of the wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. He said, "I'm going to my wife's room," but her father would not let him go in. "I was sure you thoroughly hated her," he said, "that I gave her to your friend. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead." Samson said to them, "This time I have the right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them." So he went out and caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails, lit the torches, and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned up the shocks and the standing grain, together with the vineyards and the olive groves. Okay. Yeah, this is my look very often in the book of Judges. Like, really? God is using Samson's weaknesses despite Samson's weaknesses, God is using him to cause what God wants, what God knows needs to happen so that mankind could be saved in the future. And here Samson, okay, he leaves his wife behind and goes to his father's house at the very end of chapter 14. And now it's like, well, later on in the time of wheat harvest, he takes a young goat to go see her. Really? How long has it been? Weeks, months? Yeah. And then he finds out that, her father had given her to another guy, and to one of your friends. I'm here like, he's not one of his friends. The 30 guys were basically put upon Samson at the wedding because it was Philistine tradition to drink up and for 7 days. And so Samson's other weakness, besides the ladies, is anger. And when he hears this, his father-in-law says, well, she's got a really pretty younger sister. How about her? And Samson is like, well, this time I have the right to get even with the Philistines. How do you figure? You can get even with your father-in-law, but what's that got to do with the Philistines? Hothead Samson. And so I don't know how. I'm here going, this is like, sounds really difficult to catch 300 foxes. Before I had read this, I was thinking maybe 20, if in my memory or whatever. 300 foxes tied their tails together. That's impossible in itself. Puts the lit torch into that knot there and sends them running into the fields, and they burn down everything. All the Philistine fields are just burned down, and yeah, he gets even. He has, it's like, I have the right to get even with the Philistines. Well, boy, does he. Let's continue. Verses 6 through 10. When the Philistines asked, who did this? They were told, Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law, because his wife was given to his friend. So the Philistines went up and burned her and her father to death. Samson said to them, since you've acted like this, I won't stop until I get my revenge on you. He attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. Then he went down and stayed in a cave in the rock of Etam. The Philistines went up and camped in Judah, spreading out near Lehi. The men of Judah asked, why you come to fight us? We have come to take Samson prisoner, they answered, to do to him as he did to us. Okay, so they get angry. They say, who did this? They find out who it is. And then here they go and punish the wife and father-in-law by burning them to death, which is actually apparently a favorite thing to do, because that's the same thing that the 30 guys in chapter 14 threatened Samson's wife with if she didn't find out the answer to the riddle. And so the Philistines like to burn people to death. Yeah. And so he gets back. Now, at this point, it is his wife and father-in-law. And he basically attacks them viciously, it says, and slaughtered many of them. We don't have a number. When he killed 30 in Ashkelon in chapter 14, now he has slaughtered many of them. We don't know how many, but many. And the Philistines now are like up in arms. they're falling into God's trap, because God is working on getting them to lose power over Israel. They go up into Judah, which is the neighboring land, and the Judahites are like, why are you here? We haven't done anything. And they're here like, we're here to take Samson prisoner. So we continue. I told you, this is kind of like this soap opera superhero saga. Verses 11 through 15. Then 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Etam and said to Samson, "Don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us?" He answered, "I merely did to them what they did to me." They said to him, "We've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines." Samson said, "Swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves." "Agreed," they answered. "We will only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you." So they bound him with 2 new ropes and led him up from the rock. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came toward him shouting. And here's my favorite line 3 times in the story of Samson. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Now we have another number, 1,000. It's progressing, 30, many, 1,000. With the jawbone of a donkey. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. And like I said, the ropes on his arms became like charred flax. It's like, you ever, anything that you've burned down to, cinder. You can take a match and let it burn, and then, blow it out, and that wooden match has this little warped little black thing there, and you kind of go, and it just kind of disintegrates. It's like the power of the Lord, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, and the ropes were like charred flax. It wasn't that he had the strength, it was just like, the rope became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. It's like God is he's using his anger, but he's using it in specific times and ways. Now, when Samson was angry with his wife and father-in-law, that his response does not say that it came from the Lord, his power, the whole 300 fox thing. That was his will. Bad will, not God's will, Samson's will. Bad will, and he did that, and of course the Philistines now are even more angry. The timing, it's like, but when you see it said, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, whatever's coming up next is specifically what God had planned, which was Samson killing 1,000 Philistines. Now, let's continue. Verses 16 and 17. Then Samson said, with a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men. When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone, and the place was called Ramah Lehi, or Lehi. Okay, there's a couple different. Oh, I got the hiccups. I gotta finish soon. Yeah, this is going to be a short one. The when it says I have made donkeys of them, it could also mean I have made a heap or two of them. And because the word for donkey and the word for heap are sound very similar in Hebrew, so and are written, because written Hebrew back then, ancient written Hebrew didn't have vowels. So you just kind of, if you put in certain vowels, it spells donkey. If you put other vowels, it spells heap. So whether he made donkeys of them or made heaps of dead bodies, it's, either or, it works. 1,000 men dead. And then later it talks about how he threw the jawbone away, and the place is called Ramath Lehi, which means jawbone hill. Just thought you'd like to know that. So basically, he's like, he's not traumatized by this, not in the least. He's just saying, you come against me, this is what happens. I kill 1,000 of you. And then the last part of the chapter, verses 18 through 20, because he was very thirsty. Now, turn around, about face. He's just gloated about what he has just done. And then all of a sudden, because he's very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, "You have given your servant this great victory, but must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" Then God opened up the hollow place in Lehi, and water came out of it. When Samson drank, his strength returned, and he revived. So the spring was called En Hakor, and it is still there in Lehi. En Hakor means caller's spring. He called to the Lord. He called on the Lord. And now, of course, the only time God is mentioned in this entire chapter is when it says the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, and then when he's complaining about being thirsty. Whining. It's like, just go home and get a drink of water. I mean, it's like, you've given me, this great victory, but I'm going to die of thirst here. The uncircumcised are going to take you. It's like, drama queen. Really? But yeah, that's how, it was. And then that last verse, Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. He didn't get rid of them, but he was a judge during the occupation. He was a judge during the occupation for 20 years. Okay, so Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Very different from all the other judges. All the other judges got rid of the enemy, got them out of out of Israel's land, and they had peace for 40 years. In his case, he ruled for 20, while the Philistines still had power over Israel. It's very different. And look at this again. A couple things to get out of it. When God leads you, he equips you. And for the task that he has in hand for you. Hopefully it's not to kill 1,000 Philistines, or many, or 30. But be secure in the fact that God can use and does use imperfect people. As godly as we can be, we will always be imperfect. Only God is perfect, at least right now. The Bible promises us that we will be, that the sin in us will be lifted and taken out of us, that we will be pure when we enter heaven. But right now, we are imperfect creatures. But God uses imperfect creatures all the time. All the time. And we see here in Samson a hothead with an eye for the ladies, and God is using him for the specific purpose he has for him. And then finally, the other thought I had at reading this is that Samson was leading as a judge, led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. So, yeah, it doesn't matter who's in charge. It doesn't matter who is the government, who is oppressive or not oppressive, who is helpful or not helpful. You know what? God led Israel through Samson, imperfect that he was, but led Israel through Samson for 20 years, even while under the occupation of the Philistines. For us Christians, we have a perfect leader, Jesus. And it doesn't matter if we're living in an occupied state, a government or a country of occupation, ones that does not follow God. If we find ourselves in that situation, which most of the world is in different levels, you know what? God still can lead us in and despite the higher ups, those who have power over us, those who have power over government. It doesn't matter. As far as God is concerned, they're inconsequential. Us following his lead, that's what he's looking for. So let's not dwell on what's out there, but on God who's in here, if we have given our heart and life to him. And that is the end of chapter 15, and we're going to end a little early. The last chapter of our study is a longer one, well-known story. Yes, the teaser title, Samson and Delilah. It's like we're finally getting to the most well-known part of Samson's story. And maybe there's something for us to learn in this well-known story. So, next time, if you're doing it the day I actually, it's put up on YouTube and Facebook, it'll be this weekend. The weekend, see, today is the 19th of August, 2020, COVID year. And so we're going to look at chapter 16, and that will be the end of our study. We will have studied the entire book of Judges in 21 sessions. This was session 20, and I'll see you next time. Bye.